The follow-up video, attempting to explain more Kirby lore in a single video by the Rpg Monger. Because we've had some more come along since the last one.
all right. But before that, there's actually one key thing I wasn't aware of when I made my first Kirby lore video, the occasional unreliability of English localization. More specifically in the most recent games, where the localization from Japanese to English sadly led to some key changes in the text of pause screen lore, usually due to the struggle of fitting said translations into the limited space in pause screens.
Right.
They'd be mostly fine in Triple Deluxe and Planet Robobot, where the most notable change in my opinion was the removal of a line in Galactonite's lore. Said removal clarified that throughout various eras, he's been continuously sealed away again and again, each time avoiding destruction. Though sadly, it's Star Allies that bore the brunt of these, where certain changes would go on to both completely change certain descriptions or alter them for the worse. Again, I'm not going to cover all of them, but to touch on the ones relating to the most important parts of Kirby lore, let me first correct the part about Susie. As opposed to what the English description says, she actually isn't continuing Haltman's work of mechanizing planets. Instead, she's using their advanced technology to aid others and stop any evildoers. Always thought it was a bit weird that the game said she resumed mechanization after everything that happened. Then with Void and a certain knight everyone loves, a fair amount got lost in translation. For instance, a line that got removed entirely for Void implies that it's made up of 4 core forces in the Kirby universe combined into all chaos and possibilities: Dream, Dark, Soul, and Heart. While you could take that at face value and say those are meant to be literal elements, I feel they're meant to be more abstract forces. Regardless, it definitely alludes to these forces being behind quite a few things we've seen in Kirby thus far, so I'll be referring to them as Chaos from here on out. Trust me, this will be relevant later. Next, with Morpho Knight, its lore would sadly suffer the most from localization, with quite a few important details being left behind. Namely, that Morpho Knight appeared due to Galactonite's screams of the many years spent living, which to me sounds like Morpho Knight showed up out of pity for the Knight. After all, it's been established that for untold eons after being sealed away, the Knight's very existence has been diminished to endless imprisonment with sporadic battles happening in between whenever someone happens to summon him. He clearly resents this too, as shown when without hesitation, Galactonite destroyed Stardream mere moments after it summoned him. So with seemingly no real escape from his eternal fate, it only makes sense that the most powerful warrior in the galaxy wishes to be freed from this horrible cycle, the butterfly granting his wish by annihilating Galactonite and absorbing his power. We're starting off heavy with this video. Then in another bit of pause lore that got cut in localization, there's a line that reveals the butterfly is fully capable of traveling between dimensions. Considering recent events, this tidbit is more important than ever, but that'll have to wait. Translation mishaps aside, Kirby and the Forgotten Land isn't the only Kirby game to be released in the past 3 years. In the gap between Star Allies and Forgotten Land, there were 2 minor spin-off titles that both came with some pretty notable details. In Super Kirby Clash, I'd approach this game like you would many of mainline Kirby's extra modes, where despite not being canon, there's information inside that illuminates some things in the main universe. Or well, things singular in this case, because at the very end of Super Kirby Clash's campaign, Galactonite shows up. And instead of the usual shtick of his lore further emphasizing how powerful he is or how he got sealed away, this is probably the craziest information dropped about him so far. You see, rather than being called Galactonite here, this game refers to him by the all-new name of Eon Hero. An insignificant if strange change at first glance that when paired with the fact that this new Galactonite fight has him attacking you with heart spears, all but confirms that Galactonite was one of the 4 heroes that originally sealed Void Termina's Jamba Heart away.
Yeah, no, that's actually really cool, really interesting. Yeah, was not expecting that. Although I guess to be fair, you look at it in hindsight, you're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's kind of wild. I think it's one of those, like, I think that just having Galactonite relegated to like the bonus modes, I think is the smart decision, because it doesn't, it keeps the not necessarily, I mean, it keeps part of the mystery up, right? But like, it also makes so that you're not really kind of ruining that image, right? Coming into direct contact, because like Kirby versus Galactonite, right? Realistically, Kirby would have to beat Galactonite, and I'm sure it could happen, right? But I feel that it could be seen as a detriment, right? I also love that Dark Aeon here. It looks like Cornelia's Nightmare from Code Geass. Very much a fan of that color scheme. I have a couple things. I'm trying to think of them. It's like you say, I'm trying I don't know, like Mass Effect, right? Like, it's cool when Calros in Mass Effect 3, bodies a Reaper, right? But, like, if the Reapers went to invade Earth and, the various races of the Max Effect galaxy started to body the Reapers, right? Like, I feel it comes off as a little... It doesn't quite make sense. It wouldn't quite make sense, right? I'm trying my best to find a good way to describe it. Because, like, the thing, you have an image of the thing in your head, but when the thing directly comes into the story, it kind of ruins a little bit of that mystery and a little bit of that, like, prestige that it has. But it also, especially when coming into direct conflict with main characters, right? Like, it can also ruin, like, the delivery can also be ruined. So I think that it's smart keeping Galactonite kind of like to what if scenarios. And like, it's not saying that, Galactonite doesn't exist. It's just, it's relegated and lore built through alternative scenarios where it shows up. It's super interesting to think about. You were Mafia, thank you for the best. Appreciate that. It's interesting to look at and try to toy with, like, well, what happens if the next Kirby game just brings him in, right? And would that be received positive or would that be received negatively, right?
Definitely adds credence to him resenting being sealed away, as this confirms he went from saving the galaxy to being imprisoned out of fear. Though then in Kirby Fighters 2, this game for the most part doesn't have much importance. Dubious canonicity aside, the one thing worth mentioning here is we actually get to see Shadow Kirby again. Apparently taking part in this game's battles as part of some weird prank on Kirby, it's good confirmation that the mirror world is still safe. After that, I guess the masks DDD and Meta Knight used to power up could have importance down the line, but there's nothing that points to that right now. So with all that taken care of, let's get into the real meat of the video. When it comes to the lore of Kirby and the Forgotten Land, a lot has changed from how the previous entries handled lore. And I'm not just talking about how lore is now contained in gacha figures either. Like how Star Allies heavily implied that Kirby and Void are two sides of the same coin, one being born of positive energy and the other of negative energy, Forgotten Land comes in with even more implications like that. There's some hard facts here and there, don't misunderstand me, it's just the sheer amount of implications here outweigh them by a lot. For example, the fact that this game takes place in an alternate dimension to that of Kirby's universe. It's never explicitly said, but seeing how at multiple points it's shown that time there runs significantly faster than that of Kirby's dimension, it's the most reasonable explanation considering everything else we learn. As even with Kirby getting sucked in around the same time as everyone else, he clearly arrived much later than them all due to him struggling against the portals for a few extra Popstar seconds.
So this actually is really interesting because Nintendo and HAL have successfully, effectively made an IP that you can just throw into any situation, right? Like Kirby, the funny Kirby car meme, right? It's kind of wild to think about in terms of, like, can you imagine, like, Captain Price and Silk McTavish get, like, isekai'd into, like, a dungeon anime? No, it doesn't necessarily make sense. Kirby and Co. could absolutely get isekai'd into a dungeon anime, right? And it would make sense to a degree, right? Like, I'm kind of just blinking here because how many times do we see AAA and quadruple A studios, right? Like big corpo gaming trying, and I guess you could argue, yeah, like how Nintendo corpo gaming, right? But like, how many of them keep trying to make like these multiverse whatevers, and it feels like they're just barking up the wrong tree? I'm looking at this and I'm like, this literally hits everything that a lot of these companies want, and it blows my mind that we don't see more of this, in my opinion. If anything, I'm looking at this. I don't know. I'm also just not a huge Mario fan. Like, I played Super Mario Bros. 3. I played Sunshine. I still haven't. Galaxy all the way through. Haven't played 64. I think I played, the first one, King Babam, right? But I mean, I've played very little Mario. I'm looking at this now that I actually see it. I would probably play this. I'm a little, like, I don't know, just not a huge Mario guy. I was always more Zelda's personally. But even then, I'm less of a Zelda person now because I don't like Tears of Breath. I know people do, honestly, good for you. In terms of Hyrule Warriors, personally, I just want Gundam Dynasty Warriors back, if I'm being completely honest. But outside of that, it's like, I don't know. I've never dealt with Kirby, and so this is kind of an eye opener of like, I probably would play this. That's not bad.
Fact that despite Elfilin coming back to Kirby near immediately after disappearing at the end, later he says that Claraline had to nurse him back to health after he separated the two worlds.
Elfilin reminds me of Gracie a little bit from Animal Crossing.
From the perspective of anyone left on Popstar, Kirby was probably gone for barely any time at all. In turn, while I'll do my best to make everything as concise as possible, this means I will have to delve a bit more into theory territory than normal, as there's really no way to avoid it. Luckily, many of said theories do have substantial evidence, like that whole alternate dimension business. Though before that, let's start with the things we know for sure. If you noticed any differences from what you saw in the game, that's because I'm referring to direct translations of the Japanese text, not what we got in the localized game, since sadly, like those mentioned before, bits and pieces were lost in translation. Long before portals opened up above Popstar and sucked its inhabitants into the Forgotten Land, there was a civilization much like our own. At the time, its inhabitants were struggling with the ever-looming crisis of overpopulation, their world becoming too small for their civilization. Then, out of nowhere...
Wow, hitting that one on the nose.
Where came the ultimate lifeform Fecto-Elfilis, an all-powerful alien creature that's made its sole purpose to violently conquer world after world. However, against the odds, the people of that world managed to put a stop to Elfilis' invasion by capturing the alien. With the crisis averted, they'd then begin to study its powers in Lab Discovera, turning its fantastical abilities into technology beyond their wildest dreams.
I have definitely used the term gay baby jail on more than one occasion. I don't normally whip it out, but sometimes it's just perfect.
Most importantly, replicating the method they used to get there in the first place by recreating its ability to warp anywhere, whether it be from one location to the other or even to another dimension entirely. Although while experimenting with said warp technology, Fecto-Elfilis would be split into two creatures, one holding the small amount of compassion buried within them and the other holding their invasive malicious tendencies. Once split, the newly created Elfilin would escape Lab Discovera altogether, never to be found by the civilization again. And as if Elfilis wasn't in a bad situation before, now that they're fractured, the Eternal Capsule that served as its prison had become its life support. Because in this larval state, they physically can't survive outside the capsule without copious amounts of energy. Thus, once they'd used up their invader completely and became a highly advanced technological civilization, the solution to their woes had become perfectly clear. Use their newfound warp technology to leave their cramped planet behind altogether. Their destination being pretty obvious if you've noticed certain parallels to other aspects of Kirby lore, which brings us to the next round of major implications. A bit more clear-cut compared to later ones, in Possessed Leongar's pre-fight speech, there's one line in particular that brings with it one of the biggest revelations in Kirby so far. As when he says that the Forgotten Land's inhabitants left for a land of dreams, just what other location does that sound like? That's right, the very place Kirby calls home, Dreamland. Now, to be fair, this could also mean Kirby's universe at large and not specifically Dreamland, but there's definitely evidence that these people were here at some point, because after abandoning both their planet and dimension, this civilization would go on to become the enigmatic ancients we've come to know all too well from many years worth of lore. More specifically, the scientific ancients, as the magical ones were probably already in this universe when they arrived. Need more proof? Just look at all the technology associated with the scientific ancients. Many probably made with the magical ancients during their period of friendship. There's the Lore Starcutter for one, which specializes in interdimensional travel. Ships like it most likely serve to take the scientific ancients to Kirby's dimension in the first place. And who can forget the Clockwork Stars? Alongside it being shown that many of the wishes they grant involve the use of opening portals to other worlds or dimensions, don't their cores look like a certain someone? It may just be me, but the shape of Fecto Forgo's head in that capsule looks a bit too similar to the cores of Clockwork Stars to be a coincidence. This means that with this major reveal of the scientific ancients' origins, we now know Halkandra wasn't their homeworld. It was one of possibly many places they called home after leaving their original dimension. Alongside Halkandra, even Shiverstar could have been their home for some time. The abandoned civilization on that planet does bear many striking similarities to what we've seen in Forgotten Land. However, as the world could just be the Kirby Dimensions version of the ancients' old home, there's an equal chance its inhabitants were entirely separate. It'd be pretty funny if they recreated recreated their original planet only to screw it up all over again. But I'll stop there to refrain from sprinkling in too many crazy headcanons. Back in the Forgotten Lands dimension, Fecto Forgo remained confined for eons. So
I will say I do appreciate the restraint, because there's people like me watching this who have like no idea, right? I very much appreciate when something is, shown as fact or speculative, and restraint is shown to not delve too wildly into speculation, because it gives me, at least some form of reference point in trying to really like dive into things like this.
Long
So I
in
appreciate
fact
it.
that the fauna left behind on the world would eventually evolve to a point of intelligence. Using this to their advantage, Fecto Forgo would slowly but surely spread its will over the planet from within their psychic dream dimension. While gradually gaining influence over all life on the planet, they'd managed to directly take control of a prominent animal named Leon when he discovered Fecto Forgo. Then, using Leon's famous status among the peaceful animals of the world to rally them under the plots of Forgo, Leon would become Leongar and the Beast Pack was formed. Through Leongar, this is when the Beast Pack would begin searching the planet all over for Elfilin, along with gathering food and the recently transported residents of Popstar to provide the energy Fecto Forgo needed to exist outside the capsule, which finally is where the events of Kirby and the Forgotten Land actually start. Since while Fecto Forgo still had the power to open up portals between dimensions, the fractured state significantly destabilized the power, leading to portals seemingly opening up at random like they did in the beginning of the game. In the mere moments that Kirby struggled against the pull of the portals, Elfilin and the Waddle Dees would establish their village far away from the Beast Pack's usual operations, and Meta Knight would take to defending them, all the while resisting Forgo's influence, and DDD would, well, fail at resisting to say the least. Seriously, this has to be the most extensive backstory to the events of a Kirby game yet.
Yeah.
Don't worry, there's still more to cover. Jumping
The
ahead to
butterfly.
after Fecto Elfilis's initial defeat at the hands of Kirby and Elfilin, merely destroying the ultimate lifeform's corporeal body wasn't enough to fully defeat it. Now existing solely as an incorporeal entity sustained by their own incredible psychic powers, Forgo retreated to their dream dimension. There, they'd begin to once again plan their return, despite being in an even weaker state than before. The only real advantage to be had being the fact that they could use Leon's body as their own. So getting rid of Leon's soul and smashing it to pieces for good measure, Forgo began to create an army of stronger doppelgangers from the residual psychic energy left over from Forgo influencing the entire planet, which sets the stage for the real important thing coming up. Where all the backstory surrounding the Ancients and Elfilis was pretty significant, equally so is the second appearance of Morpho Knight.
Then the spear almost looks like Gabolg from it almost looks like a Caduceus, right? The twin snakes, right? But I mean, it reminds me of Estinian spear, specifically the Gabolg from Final Fantasy XIV.
And Elfilis was pretty significant, equally so is the second appearance of Morpho Knight. Unlike its introduction in the What If mode of Star Allies, this marks its first appearance in the canon timeline. Now this is incredibly monumental for several reasons. Not only is this the first time ever that a fight originating in Kirby's What If scenarios made the transition over to being 100% canon, it also raises even more questions about Morpho Knight itself. For one, while Hal was definitely alluding to Morpho Knight eventually crossing over into the canon universe before, I did not expect it to happen so soon.
Right.
It's still an incredibly mysterious entity, but we do still learn some interesting details. Namely, its appearance right before Fecto Forgo's soul was about to fight Kirby reinforces Morpho Knight's nature of reaping all-powerful characters that have lived unnaturally long. As much like Galactonite before it, Fecto Forgo has also been trapped for an unimaginable amount of time, only surviving due to its sheer power. But it could also be as simple as Morpho Knight absorbing him solely due to his power, like the gacha lore states. When it comes to Morpho Knight this time, it's actually what happens after you fight him that brings in a lot of very important illusions. Like how when you beat him, rather than only dissipating back into butterflies, Fecto Forgo manages to escape. And before we get to all of what comes next, this confirms a pretty massive detail. You see, when Morpho Knight was first defeated in Star Allies, there was no such animation for Galactonite escaping, which leads me to believe that all this time, Morpho Knight still holds Galactonite within them. In a weird roundabout way, this means Galactonite's entered the canon universe too. Now this is stepping a bit into theory territory here, but all the signs point to this. After all, with it being shown that Morpho Knight still has many of Galactonite's attacks, this makes it incredibly likely that the supposed strongest warrior in the galaxy could be inches away from making his first canon appearance. We'll just have to see what awaits us with what's what's sure to be plenty of future Morpho Knight fights. On a side note, I do wonder if, like Morpho Knight, there's only one Galactic Knight that can be summoned from across dimensions. Because if that isn't the case, there could now be two Galactic Knights in Kirby, the one absorbed by Morpho Knight and the as of yet unseen one in the canon universe. But
I actually really like that there's the concept of there being kind of a singularity. A character can be a singularity across different dimensions. That there is just one, right? I don't know. I'm actually a huge fan of it because especially when you start working with different dimensions, especially when you start working with multiverses, right? Like that means that there is an infinite amount of, or however, realistically, however many, right? Like 14 is split into different, like 14 different shards, right, of the source. So there is a finite technical number on that. But like if you're dealing with loose, dimensions, hand wave, right? You could have an infinite number of, of your character. So being able to really kind of like, and this is the issue that I know Critical Drinker brought it up in regards to Kang the Conqueror and not really from Marvel, from MCU, right? And not some people not really being able to kind of grasp an entity like that. As I understand it, haven't seen the movies, don't really care, right? As I understand it, he's supposed to be this big bad, and there's supposed to be different, multiverse copies of himself, right? But then again, in the multiverse, everyone has multiverse copies of themselves. But it's like it's very hard for somebody to fight an entity that can weaponize that, right? Like it's very hard for humans to comprehend numbers over a certain amount, right? Like imagine $1. Now imagine $100. Now imagine $1,000. Now imagine $1 million. How about $1 billion? Can you imagine $1 trillion? What about $1 quadrillion? Right? Like at a certain point, your brain starts to and that's not a fault of people. Fault of people, yeah. But like that's like your brains just can't comprehend things over a certain amount, right? You can comprehend $100, you can comprehend $1 million, but it's like, what does $1 quadrillion look like? And you're like, I need at least some point of reference, right? I think that's ultimately why we get certain comparisons, like a teaspoon of neutron star is like the mass of, I don't remember. Like it's why we make comparisons. I don't remember specifically the mass of the neutron star. There's a famous comparison there. I can't remember it offhand, but like that's why we'll liken certain things, right? Where this weighs as much as 600 rhinoceroses, rather than saying what it actually weighs, right? Yeah, like so apply that effect to what was supposed to be the MCU's new big bad, right? And it's hard for audiences to kind of grapple with that, right? Like, and even then, like, you also run into issues of trying to bait and switch your audience a little bit, right? Like, Vader into Palpatine technically could have not worked, but, like, it ended up working due to the writing, right? But very much it could have gone the way of, like, Snoke and Palpatine, right? Where you think that Snoke is the big bad, and then whoops, somehow Palpatine returned, right? Like, there's different writing traps you can fall into, and, I feel that Kirby, for the most part, looking at these two videos we've looked at, seems to have handled a lot of this very well. Even if it's just very casually, right? And it's very interesting to bring a multi-dimensional entity who is their own singular, their own singular existence. And I think that is a good way to potentially power balance something like that.
That's a headache for another day. Going back to Fecto Elphalus's last shot at revenge, we're met with this game's soul boss equivalent, Chaos Elphalus. Having pulled the reverse Morpho Knight and taken some energy from it for a change, the simple fact that it's now called Chaos Elphalus hints at Morpho Knight's very origin. Again, stepping a bit back into crackpot theories here, remember all that stuff about Chaos from earlier? Alongside its components consisting of things that are all pretty important in Kirby, it's said to be the very origin of Void itself. Well, considering that Chaos Elphalus only received the Chaos part of its name after taking some of Morpho Knight's power, that leads me to believe that Morpho Knight is either linked or straight up comes from this mysterious all-encompassing force. Like many soul bosses, Chaos Elphalus makes use of various attacks we've seen past soul fights utilize. For a long time, I always thought it was just some fan service on Hal's part, nothing more. However, seeing that it only received set attacks after taking on the power of Chaos, that leads me to believe that every soul fight until now has had some sort of connection to Chaos.
We see this in games like Dark Souls, right? Where we'll see certain enemies use certain attacks, right? Like if you had let's hypothetically say there was a Dark Souls 4, right? let's hypothetically say it existed, right? And you had, I don't know, some form of, troubled night. Let's NPC troubled night, right? But then NPC troubled night literally does the Dark Wraith hand thing. They give you the good suck, right? Then you're like, oh, you're a naughty boy, right? Like because now that relates them to Londor, New Londo, right? It kind of like ties them to the Abyss, the Dark Wraiths and stuff like that, right? The Four Kings even. Or if someone uses, like Way of White Circlet, right? What are the face spells called? It scales off of fate. I don't remember. I'm trying to remember offhand. It's been a minute. It's not incantation. Whatever. The Way of White Chrono, or whatever, it has like the discs that fly out from you from several different directions, right? And then cut things around you and then come back to you. And then you're like, okay, no, this is clearly someone who has relation to faith, probably a church-based, in some sort of church-based NPC following, some sort of tie to Gwyn, right? Or the Way of White, right? Like you see the crystal channelers, right? And it's like, oh yeah, no, they're using crystal sorceries. No, they're clearly just fans of Seath, right? And then I think, does Big Hat Logan, does he start using crystal sorceries? Or does he get better crystal sorceries? I'm trying to remember. Because Big Hat Logan goes insane as you progress through Dark Souls 1. And then until you get to the archives, and then Big Hat Logan finds the knowledge that he was looking for, but it wasn't the knowledge that, was super good for him, and therefore he kind of just goes insane, right? So you can also show things like that, right? Like, I don't know. Dark Souls does certain things where certain enemies will use certain attacks, or they'll do certain things where that they're tied to something, or at the very least, there's the implication that they're tied to something. So I actually really like this, like them reinforcing kind of show not telling of like, oh, well, now that they're in soul form, they have these different attacks that we've seen other soul bosses have, right? It kind of reinforces that.
For all, one of the things stated to make up chaos in the first place is soul. As it stands, we don't have enough puzzle pieces here to fully predict what this entails, but I'm certain that this is building up to something unbelievably immense. So after putting Elphalus's eons of struggling to an end, Kirby's power of miracles allowed the entity one last chance at rebirth. Thus, with Elphalus willingly rejoining with Elphalin to become whole for good, that just about wraps up all the new lore there is. As minor as it is, during the final battle, Elphalus does share one attack with another boss before the whole chaos thing happens. Just like Void Terminus' third phase, he also dives toward you, dragging a weapon across the ground. Not to mention, in Elphalus's theme, there's a portion that features very similar organ progression to that of Void Terminus' third phase too. You could easily chalk the two up to coincidence, but I felt it was at least worth mentioning here at the end. It is interesting how, in spite of how much of the Forgotten Land is shown, we never get a glimpse of what the scientific ancients might have looked like. Taking context clues and the cardboard cutout in Wandaria into consideration, I think it's safe to say they were humans, or something resembling them at least. Adeline's got some splaining to do. So there you have it, another video of me incessantly rambling about Kirby lore. Just about finished that strawberry shortcake from last time, so how about a Kirby burger? Real quick before I thank my patrons, as I'm sure a good number of you found me from my Kirby lore video in the first place, I've actually made more Kirby videos since then. Do check them out if you need your hunger for Kirby satiated that much more. And now, to those who've continued to help out the channel, I'd like to give a heartfelt thanks to Nathan and everyone else who's decided to contribute. You guys are the best. If you want to help me continue making more videos like these and receive a special thank you amongst a lot of other bonus stuff, do check out my Patreon, a link in the description. Man, I cannot believe that it's been over 3 years since I made my first one of these. Crazy how ever since making that one, it's become one of the most watched Kirby lore videos on the site. As someone who's been a Kirby fan for most of my life, it's the best knowing that a lot of people have gotten into Kirby through that video. Hope this one lived up to the hype. Big thanks to these accounts who did direct translations of the lore and text in recent Kirby games. I would have absolutely missed stuff without them. Though from here on out, don't expect one of these with every new Kirby game. Like how I covered the last 2 spin-offs here, I'll only be making new ones if there's enough new lore to warrant it. But honestly, if they keep packing games to the brim with lore like Star Allies and Forgotten Land, I'm sure you all won't have to wait that long until I make another one of these. So that being said, I'm the Rpg Monger, and don't forget that each and every one of you are fantastic.
Honestly, I enjoyed it. I thought this was a really good follow-up, and it's super cool to see the amount of success that they got off of this. That's super cool. I'm glad that it worked out for them and that, you know, they're still going with it. That's honestly really cool. And especially because I've been super stressed in a lot of things that I've been doing. And I mean, some of that is within my control, some of that just outside of my control that I take, honestly, just way too harshly. It's been really cool to kind of sit back and relax, you know, react to something like this, something that's a little more upbeat, a little more positive, a little more in depth that I can kind of sink my teeth into, knowing next to nothing about it, if I'm being completely honest, and honestly finding a lot of enjoyment here. So it makes me wonder what Kirby title I'm going to be able to get my hands on. I think I have Kirby Air Riders, but I know that's you know, like racing game status. I know I got that for the GameCube a while back, so I'll have to go and boot that up at some point. But thank you everyone for watching. I really do appreciate it, and thank you, RPG Monger, for honestly just an amazing video. I had a lot of fun with this, and sounds like a lot of you guys did too. This was honestly super cool. I had a lot of fun with this, and this was a very nice change of pace, and I will see you all in the next one.